"Am off to the bank." These are the chilling words Thierry Paulin would tell his unsuspecting friends before setting off to hunt his elderly victims. Some will dub him the Monster of Montmartre. Others will come to know him as the Granny Killer. This is the story of Thierry Paulin, a French serial killer whose reign of terror in the streets of northeast Paris during the mid-1980s will claim the lives of at least 21 elderly women over a period of 3 years. But who was Thierry Paulin? What drove him to target the most vulnerable members of society with such sadistic cruelty? And how was his horrific killing spree finally brought to an end anyway? I'm Francois, your host. Join me as we unravel the chilling details of this dark and disturbing chapter in Parisian history. So, go on, grab yourself your favorite hot drink, settle in, and prepare yourself for this episode of Espresso Crime. Our story doesn't begin in Paris. It begins in Fort-de-France, the capital city of Martinique, an overseas department and region of France located in the Caribbean. For the trivia fact collectors out there, Martinique is also the outermost region of the European Union, owing to the fact that its inhabitants are French citizens with full political and legal rights. It is in this French Caribbean outpost that on the 28th of November 1963, Thierry Paulin was born. Not much is known of his life in Fort-de-France. What we do know is that his teenage mother got pregnant by a bricklayer who quickly abandoned her to settle in France, leaving Thierry in the care of his grandmother. But Thierry's grandmother, she owns a restaurant by the beach, which leaves her with very little time to care for him. In 1973, now aged 10, Thierry moves back in with his mother, who had by then remarried and had 5 children of her own. This reunion did not last long. By all standards, Paulin was a difficult child. He didn't do too well in school and got into fights. He even once threatened his teacher with a knife. Frustrated, his mother tracks down Paulin's father in Toulouse, a city in southern France, often called the Pink City due to the rosy hue of its rooftops, and urges him to take Thierry back. Rather than pay alimony, Thierry's father agrees and arranges for his son to join him. At the age of 13, Thierry is therefore forced to live with complete strangers in not only his father, but 2 half-siblings. Siblings who make sure he knows he is not welcome by making life difficult for him, playing pranks, and even snubbing him at Christmas. If he was a troubled child arriving in France, now aged 15, Paulin, he is out of control. His misbehavior at school continues, so much so that his father kicks him out of the house. To survive, Thierry frequents the seedy parts of Toulouse and becomes a male prostitute. Mind you, Paulin does try to pursue more conventional paths to making something of himself, taking on various apprenticeships including one to become a hairdresser, but these all fail. It is 1980, and at the age of 17, Paulin decides to enlist into military service in France. He joins the paratrooper, but this does not go well for him either. It seems that his ethnicity and blatant homosexuality antagonize his peers. He drops out. It is around this time that Paulin commits his first crime. On the 14th of November 1982, Paulin decides to rob an old lady in her grocery shop at knife point. She recognizes him as a previous customer and calls the police. Paulin gets away with about 200 francs, about $50. But get this, rather than making as much distance between him and the scene of his crime, he crosses the street, calls for a taxi, and orders a coffee. The taxi arrives at the same time as the police. Predictably, he is quickly recognized and arrested. In June 1983, Paulin is jailed for 2 years, but the sentence is suspended. It's not clear why Paulin committed his first crime in such a clumsy fashion. What is clear, though, is that this is his first taste of crime, and going forward, leaving his victim alive will be a mistake he will try to avoid. We are now in 1984. Paulin decides to join his mother in Nanterre, near Paris. He becomes a waiter at the Paradis Latin, a transvestite club in Paris. But the Paradis Latin isn't just any transvestite club. It is an iconic landmark for that community. Originally a theatre built by the French Emperor Napoleon, the venue was destroyed by fire decades later, and rebuilt by Gustave Eiffel at the same time as Mr. Eiffel built his famous tower. To be clear, Thierry was at the heart of an intoxicating, eclectic life, surrounded by writers, poets, journalists, politicians, intellectuals, students, workers, merchants, aristocrats. There, he starts a passionate relationship with a 19-year-old French Guyanese drug addict named Jean-Thierry Mathurin, a man that Thierry will later describe as the only thing he ever loved. They hang out at the palace and, looking in from the outside, marvel at how the other half lives. They both aspire to a life of pleasure and excess, which includes, or perhaps begins with, taking and selling drugs. Paulin dreams of opening his own cabaret. He is by now an accomplished narcissist, consumed by this belief that he is owed more from life than he is getting. The behavior problem that plagues his teens manifests now as a young adult. His uncontrollable temper, which causes him to beat on his pregnant half-sister and make the death threats to his own mother after she refuses to fund plastic surgery on his lip, is too much for his mother. She kicks him out. At work, things are not much better. He loses job at the Paradis after a fit of jealousy that turns into violence. Maybe it is the convergence of these events that makes him tip over. Because Thierry Paulin, he has a realization. He convinces Mathurin that the only way of financing the lifestyle they aspire to is to rob old people. The year is 1984. At that time, in Paris, 250,000 women aged 65 or over live alone. The campaign of terror that will make Paulin so infamous begins in earnest on the 5th of October of that year. That first crime will signal 6 weeks of pure carnage when he and his accomplice will kill 8 victims. That Friday 5th, Paulin and Mathurin first try to rob someone on the Paris metro. They almost get caught. Back on the street level, Mathurin is upset. "This was too dangerous," he says angrily. "No matter. Paulin, he has another idea. You see that woman over there? We're going to do her." That unfortunate old lady is 91-year-old Germaine Petitot, whom they follow home, tie, gag, beat and rob. They leave her alive. The next victim they hunt the very same day will not be so lucky. That victim is Anna Barbier-Pontus, a tiny octogenarian widow, no taller than 5 feet. She is found beaten, strangled in her 2-bedroom flat, with her hands and feet bound. Her shopping bags are on the floor, suggesting that she had been attacked as she got into her flat. Her flat has been ransacked to such an extent that when the police came in, her bedroom floor was not visible. Fingerprints are lifted, but unfortunately generate no lead. Barely 4 days later, 89 years old Suzanne Foucault is found dead in her flat. Like Anna, Suzanne has been bound, beaten, and but this time suffocated to death with a plastic bag. Unfortunately, Paulin and Mathurin were just getting started. Over the next 7 weeks, 6 more women are found murdered with a brutality so gratuitous it defeats understanding. Cigarette burns, broken ribs, broken jaws, broken nose, severed fingers. They even forced an old lady to drink a bottle of drain blocker. Who does that to a person? To a harmless old lady, no less? Savagery had become the criminal duo's instrument of persuasion to make defenseless victims confess the location of their money. The duo's gain is often meager, averaging the French francs equivalent of $60. But it seems that the violence is not just about money. The pair appear to take pleasure in causing suffering. By that stage, the police are able to work out a pattern. They are hunting 2 men, killers who target lone, elderly women in the late morning on their way back from shops or the post office, after they have collected their pension. These killers follow them home, and as the women open the door, they force themselves in. Once inside, they brutalize their defenseless victims to their heart's content for monetary gains. The media gets hold of the stories, and fear grips the Paris's 18th arrondissement. A quarter of Paris ordinarily known for the Sacré-Cœur, the Moulin Rouge, its red light district, and artists' bohemian lifestyle celebrated by classic movies like Amélie, now holds its own against London's Whitechapel in the late 1880s. Paris City Council takes action and offers a free service where old ladies can be escorted to get their pension. Jacques Chirac, the then mayor of Paris, who will later become French president, holds a meeting attended by 2,000 old ladies. There, he gives them his every reassurance that the killer, now dubbed the killer of the century, will be caught. That's all very well, but to terrified Parisians, these are just words. The panic fuels political debate over the need to reinstate the death penalty that had been abolished just 3 years prior. Extreme right political parties reach record high popularity in the area of Paris when the murders take place. Hundreds of police officers walk the streets, stopping and searching at will. Over 100 suspects are arrested, questioned, then released. Large areas of the City of Lights are cordoned off. Traveller campsites are raided in the hope of finding stolen goods belonging to the victims. The people of Paris want results, and the media are quick to oblige. The Parisian newspaper releases the picture of the photo fit, confidently headlined, "Here is the killer." The source of this picture is unclear, but it seems that such details are not particularly important in the grand scheme of things. The picture is circulated and leads to a photographer being arrested, questioned for 3 hours by the French police and eventually released. By a cruel, cynical twist of fate, little do they know that the serial killer duo live at Rue Victor Mazzei, a mere 50 meters away from the search perimeters. By a crueler twist of fate, the first truths about the serial killers come from the mouths of 3 boys, aged 8, 9, and 10. These boys report 2 men of African descent seen leaving the scene of a crime, but the reports of little children must be dismissed. By the end of 1984, the crimes appear to have stopped. The silence is puzzling. Could increased police patrol and media scrutiny have given the killers fright? Have they been arrested? Or maybe the killers died in a car accident? The truth is far more pedestrian than that. Mathurin convinces Paul that they should pause their killing spree. The murders have attracted too much attention. It's all that people talk about. They leave Paris for Toulouse, where Paulin rekindles a relationship with his bricklayer father. Curiously, Mathurin takes to the trade, but honest work is not for Paulin, who prefers to spend his time frequenting transvestite bars. The relationship between the two, sour, drugs reignite Paulin's jealous streak and the violent behavior that comes with it. Mathurin, now a victim of domestic abuse, decides to leave Paulin. Importantly though, the killing spree is not something Paulin replicates in Toulouse, because for 11 months of 1985, the crimes stop. Unfortunately, this hiatus comes to end on the 20th of December in the 14th arrondissement of Paris with the murder of 91 years old Estelle Donjou. Then another 8 murders follow in the new year. But these murders are a bit different. The gratuitous sadism that characterized the murders of 1984 is no more. Has Paulin grown a conscience? Was Mathurin not Paulin the sadist? Or maybe Paulin finds that controlling his victim on his own is a bit of a challenge. Be that as it may, the killings have resumed. But Paulin, he has not given up on his dreams to set up his own business, an agency that organizes LGBT events. Paulin even has the gall to write to the police for their support. All the while, he lives in hotel rooms and crashes at lovers or friends. Spring 1986. His agency now set up gets hired for one event. The evening is successful, but not financially. Maybe that's the reason that leads Paulin his old habits. On the 14th of June 1986, he tortures and strangles 86 years old Ludmilla Lieberman. Unfortunately, Lady Luck is determined to shun the French police. Here is why. In August 1986, a drug dealer Paulin beats up after a deal going bad, reports him to the police for assault. Paulin is arrested and charged with grievous bodily harm. Incredibly, his fingerprints are not taken as normally would of any newly arrested criminal. Even if they had, it's not clear that this would have helped the police realize who they were dealing with. We are in 1986, and there is no national database for fingerprints in France. The system is antiquated. Fingerprint comparisons can only be effected manually with a magnifying glass against those kept in police files held across France. 50,000 suspects over 3 years multiplied by 10 fingers. That's the scale of analytics facing the French. What could be done in a couple of hours today would require the French police back then 2 to 3 months. In 1987, Thierry Paulin appears before a judge facing charges of grievous bodily harm. In court, Paulin doesn't show much interest in the proceedings. He informs the court that he has AIDS. The court condemns him for 12 months. September 1987, Paulin is released. He's dyed his afro hair white. The nocturnal lifestyle beckons, but he is broke. What to do? He goes back to his old tricks, but on a scale that makes Jack the Ripper a novice. In October 1987, he stalks old women from the market to their home. He will go on to attack 11 women in the 10th and 12th arrondissement. Make no mistake, the granny killer is back. Fear paralyzes Paris once again. Meanwhile, for Paulin crimes pays. He lives the good life. He hangs out with middle-class students and throws champagne-filled dinners across Paris. He networks right, left and center in the world of transvestite showbiz. Still aspiring to make his dream a reality, he even manages to discuss with a TV celebrity his pet project, an Oscar-like ceremony for France's most celebrated cabarets like the Moulin Rouge or Crazy Horse. The arrest. Thierry Paulin's murderous rampage finally catches up with him. For what must be a seminal moment in our story, Paulin becomes sloppy. One of his victims survives his attack without his realizing. She is Berthe Inaltere, who after being robbed and beaten senseless, manages to play dead. She provides a description that enables the first ever photo fit of Paulin. The police now know very important details about their elusive serial killer. He is neither black nor white, has a haircut like Carl Lewis, at the time the African-American 100-meter Olympic gold medalist superstar, the Usain Bolt of the late 1980s if you like, and he wears a diamond earring on his left ear, and Berthe also thinks he has a gap between his front teeth. Paulin's description is disseminated around all Parisian police stations. On the 27th of November 1987, Paulin kills what will be his last victim in 73 years old Geneviève Germont. The proceeds of his barbarism funds an extravagant party to celebrate his 24th birthday the following day, with 30 friends in restaurant in Paris, 15,000 francs, $3,000, which he pays in cash. Finally, on the morning of Monday, 1st December 1987, police officer Francis Jacob is conversing with retailers in a street of Paris when he catches in the corner of his eyes someone who seems to meet the general description of the suspect. Jacob stops him and asks for his ID. He will later say that when he saw ID sporting that famous haircut, he said to himself, "That's the guy." Thinking that he's being pulled off for some drug-related offense, Paulin protests. He even shows his writs to prove he's clean. But for now, Jacob plays his cards close to his chest. He asks the suspect to follow him to the police station for ID verification. Everything unravels very quickly after that. His fingerprints are confirmed by officers who had them over the years practically memorized. They can't believe the results. The man in the next room is the granny killer, with 21 murders attached to his name. The man they have been thinking about every single day, if not hour, for the past 3 years. Now they have 48 hours to get a confession out of him. At first, Paulin denies any involvement with the murders. He asks for the journalists and a lawyer. The narcissist in him worries about what people will say about him. He, in fact, obsesses about it. The image of the affable, smiley, exotic entrepreneur he has so carefully curated over the years is about to shatter for all the world to see. Paulin can't handle it. The interviewing officer is so concerned about this mental state that he handcuffs his ankles to the desk to make sure Paulin doesn't try and jump out of the window during their interrogations. After 2 days, Paulin finally relents. "Okay, that's me. I did them all," he says irritatedly. If the police were shocked by the savagery of his crimes, they are now shocked by Paulin's exceptional clinical recall of his criminal acts, some of which are 3 years old. His main concern now is that his exploits be accurately recorded. He gives up the name of his accomplice, Jean-Thierry Mathurin. Mathurin is picked up the following day in the arms of a popular transvestite performer. He will later admit that back in 1984, he confessed to his mum robbing old women. His mother cried and kicked him out. In spring 1987, the AIDS symptoms get the better of Paulin. He can no longer be interviewed as he is too ill. It seems Paulin is on the run from justice once more, and this time permanently, for he dies in the hospital's prison on the 12th of April 1988. In 1991, Mathurin is tried for the 8 murders committed by him and Paulin between October and November 1984. Throughout the trial, Mathurin constantly minimizes his role, blaming Paulin for pretty much everything. "I am aware that what I was participating in was inhuman, and I must pay for this," he says, but adds that he wasn't himself, and the drugs were to blame. In court, he'll also go into a diatribe about having been mistreated by his father and raped by 2 French legionnaires in his youth. The court sentences him to life in prison, but in 2009, he is released. This takes us to the end of this terrible affair. Paulin's capacity to lead a double life, torturing and killing during the day and drinking champagne at night, should leave us unhinged. Sadly, it's a reminder that basic empathy towards the suffering of others does not abound in all of us. In later interviews, he will claim calmly, "I targeted them because they were easy targets. Personally, I remain unconvinced that this is the whole of the story. Could he and his accomplice have not worn masks to prevent identification and content themselves with intimidating and stealing? Did they have to torture and kill so enthusiastically? Could there be other subliminal motives behind his penchant for cruelty? Perhaps motives tied, in the case of Paulin at least, to his grandmother? Is Paulin deserving of our pity because he grew up pretty much unloved? Did that trigger a gradual but predictable descent in criminality? Hard to say. The inventive sadism that characterizes his crimes is not exactly the best vehicle for empathy. Or maybe his criminal behavior was something he could not control and deserves our pity in that regard. What do you think? What about Jean-Thierry Mathurin? Was he treated too leniently by the courts? Was he really an unwilling accomplice in all this? Manufacturing empathy for this duo is a bit hard when you think about these 21 victims. We are talking about women that were more or less born at the turn of the century. They would have been in their early teens when the Titanic sank in 1912. They would have survived 2 world wars, witnessed some of the last century's greatest historical events, only to die meaningless deaths at the hands of psychopathic thieves. Is that fair? Does that make any sort of sense? I will leave you to ponder on these questions. I hope you enjoyed this episode of Espresso Crime. If you did, please consider liking and subscribing. This channel is still very young, and any support will be super appreciated. Thank you very much. Until the next episode, take care of yourself and of each other.